Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. And today we're going to go in a little bit different direction. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me Adam Grant. I thought I knew a little about Sherlock Holmes. Adam knows a whole lot. And he is going to tell us about his role in podcasting. But we met at Podfest Expo and found out about his love of radio Sherlock Holmes. So I asked him if he would come on the podcast, and he graciously agreed to. So, Adam, with that incredibly long winded introduction, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
It's great to be here, Tom.
Adam, you have one of the most ubiquitous and comprehensive podcasts and websites I have ever seen. And when you talk about niche, you are niche. So, why don't you tell our audience your role in podcasting?
I am the host primarily of the Great Detectives of Old Time Radio. It's my big podcast, started back in 2009. And the way it works is every day, Monday through Saturday, we have a different old time radio detective program that we play. And we play through each series from the first episode until the final available episode. And we've recorded 4,300 plus episodes now, and so many series that we've completed and so many different programs that we've been able to listen to and also introduce people to.
It's really just a thrill for me to meet someone who loves old time radio. Why do you love the radio format so much, Adam?
What I really like about it, I think it opens up so many creative opportunities for storytelling. I remember an episode of the Bob Hope program where they were like doing this ridiculous sketch. They're like, and there are elephants and all these things. And one of them said, you just wait until television because you just cannot get away with that. But you have the ability to tell really big, really interesting stories. And I think there's a lot less superficiality than you'll get in the visual medium. Because when you are an actor on stage or in film or television, you're really limited to what physically you can play. For example, if I were an actor, I would never get cast as one of the seven dwarfs. It would require a lot of forced perspective to make that work. But over radio, what you hear is the full creativity of the actor. They can get behind that microphone. And if you can produce a convincing enough voice, you might be a 5 foot 1 inch tall woman, but you can become the greatest cyborg warrior that ever lived. And another thing I enjoy about it is that it's an intimate medium. I think compared to any other way of telling stories, the closeness of the story and the way that it's just your mind and your ears working, and it's really effective. It's just an incredible art form that I wish more people got to enjoy.
Let's turn now to Sherlock Holmes on the radio. As I mentioned, you have an incredible website. On your website, you list the actors that you've been able to track who played Sherlock Holmes on the radio. Could you just go through those for us?
Sure. I guess I'll go ahead and put two in the same class just because, even though their performances were years apart, but they're worth noting. William Gillette wrote the first great Sherlock Holmes play for Arthur Conan Doyle at a time when Doyle had tired of Holmes and he still wanted to make money off of him. And so William Gillette wrote the first play, and I believe he wrote others as well. And many of the conventions about Sherlock Holmes that we don't actually get from the novels originate in these stage plays. And William Gillette was getting up into his 70s and 80s, but he still went on the air and performed a version of his play for radio. And there's a clip of that of about a couple minutes out there. And I played that back in 2009 because Sherlock Holmes was one of the first series that we did. And Orson Welles, of course, is best known for his Mercury Theater, and in particular, the War of the Worlds adaptation. But one of the other plays that they did for the Mercury Theater was the immortal Sherlock Holmes, which really did a great job condensing Gillette's play and putting together a really exciting performance. And the first ongoing series of Holmes originated from New York. And we have just a few samples of those. The first was Richard Gordon, and then you had Louis Hector, who were obscure actors, but the performances that we have, I think we've got a total of 5 from those eras, are really interesting. In fact, one of the Louis Hector performances actually has uh, something that's reminiscent of the movie Rear Window, which would be made about 2 decades later. And you had Basil Rathbone, and Basil Rathbone had made 2 big Hollywood features as Sherlock Holmes. He starred in The Hound of the Baskervilles, and he also did a movie called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And they went ahead and did a radio series with him and with Nigel Bruce, who played Dr. Watson in film. And this was one of the first instances where you brought the screen actors to radio. And so he started doing, generally, they were pretty short, a series of 22, 26 episodes, and then there would be a break. And then along came World War II, and the idea of Holmes and Watson were considered critical to morale and to the relationship between the United States and Britain. And so it became something where it was an every week affair where he would be appearing as Sherlock Holmes while also making the Universal Sherlock Holmes films. And he made 200 radio episodes, and he made 12 additional movies over the course of a few years. And then he got burnt out on the character. And they decided to continue Sherlock Holmes with Tom Conway as Holmes, who had played the Falcon in some B movies and was the brother of George Sanders. And Nigel Bruce continued on. That lasted a season. And then the series moved back to New York with John Stanley playing Sherlock. And that lasted 2 years. And then they went back to Hollywood, and we get a series with Ben Wright as Sherlock Holmes. And I should mention that everything after the last season of after the including the last season of Basil Rathbone is pretty well collected, but we're missing almost all of the Ben Wright series, which was a shame because he was a very solid actor. And then it was done over American radio, but then Henry Allen Towers, who was a great British radio syndicator, he made a series for international syndication that got picked up by NBC, and it starred 2 of the 3 great British actors of the first half of the 20th century. You had Sir John Gielgud and Sir Ralph Richardson in that. Gielgud as Holmes, Richardson as Watson, and it was a relatively short series, but they adapted key stories from the Sherlock Holmes canon. And that's pretty much the ones that come from the golden age of radio. If you try to survey all of them, it is just too much to name. There were BBC, 2 different BBC versions. There was the Carlton Hobbs version of the 1950s and 60s, and then the Clive Merrison version that started in the 1980s and continued into the 21st century. And then in the United States, there's also Jim French Productions made their own version of Sherlock Holmes starring John Patrick Lowry that's still ongoing. And then you have the British company Big Finish, which is making their own adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. But that's just a few of them. It's been done. If you go through all the one offs, I keep getting surprised by all of the. I'll run into some Sherlock Holmes with some random radio actors in it from like the 1980s or 90s. There's more of them than you can shake a stick at. It's like trying to track the film adaptations.
Is there one actor that you feel is the definitive Holmes, or do you really feel each one brought obviously their own interpretation, but really their own version of Holmes that we can enjoy?
I think when it comes to radio, particularly when you're looking at Golden Age, it's got to be Basil Rathbone for the very simple reason that the next two actors to play Sherlock Holmes were really you listen to them, were really playing to Rathbone's voice. In fact, Rathbone got annoyed by this. He just decided, I'm done. I did my time. I've gotten typecast. I want a break from this role. But because Conway and Stanley, the way that they played the character, the way they voiced it was close to his, he had people still coming up to him on the street and asking him about episodes. And I haven't been in it for 3 years. So I guess by the fact that the next two actors impersonated him, automatically that's a win for Rathbone. I think he's the one that people think about. Modern, I think there's some great performances. I listened to a set of Clive Merrison and he in the Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and he was really good. And I think Nicholas Briggs really shows some great versatility because with the productions that they do at Big Finish for Sherlock Holmes, they go throughout his career. So he's played young Holmes and old Holmes and really is very attuned to where the character is going to be. And I think that though there are quite a few to enjoy, but when you look at the Golden Age, I think that Rathbone is easily the definitive voice.
The original short stories by Conan Doyle, there were 57 short stories and there are 4 novels. There are many more radio shows, so there are obviously treatments and screenplays beyond the original set of stories, but I wanted to focus on the Doyle stories, and do you think they lend themselves to a radio treatment?
I think it varies a bit by story. I think this the sort of standard story from Dr. Watson narrating is usually pretty easy to pull off. I think some of them are a little bit more something like The Final Problem, where that is a lot of dialogue. And then it does come down to the creative team to find a way to tell the story in a creative way. I don't think there's any that you can't tell, but there are some that I think are going to require a bit more skill to tell and have it work well in the medium.
Adam, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I wanted to end by asking if our listeners wanted more information on the Great Radio Detective or your show, Great Radio's Mysteries, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
They can check out our website at detectives.net. That's got all the articles, all the archives. You can also find us over on YouTube. Just put Great Detectives of Old Time Radio in. And any podcast store, we're there and posting new episodes Monday through Thursday or Monday through Saturday, excuse me. And you can also find most of our programs archived either by series or by volume.
Adam, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to visit with me. It was a ton of fun sitting next to you at PodFest, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thanks so much. I was glad to be with you, Tom.